Now, if you go to ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, you can easily identify or have an idea about how much it costs a specific service or specific product, regardless of the industry. So why not make that particular information explicit? I believe people underestimate of the power of the channel. It is the only channel that allows you to get in touch with your customers the day you want, on the moment you want, to say what you want. Obviously, there are some components that you have to respect, like deliverability. You have to collect consent before you send emails, this kind of stuff. But still nowadays, it's the only channel that allows you to get access directly to them and build relationships with them. Speak more with your customers. Try to understand them. It's not because it's your customer today that is going to be your customer tomorrow. You need to really understand the people that is believing in you. You understand their pain points. And not only by email, but calling customers, interacting with them. That would be my first recommendations. Number 2 would be...
Hey, welcome everyone to another episode of eCoffee with Experts. Today I'm joined by Marino Marks. Marino is the head of digital and lifecycle marketing at NVISION, where he specializes in email marketing, CRM strategy, and marketing automation. With more than a decade of experience in helping businesses build customer journeys that drive long-term growth, he's become an expert in turning leads into loyal customers through lifecycle marketing and automation. Marino, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you on the show.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
So you began focusing on email in about 2008 when the rapid growth of Facebook made you recognize the difference between building an audience and owning that relationship with the audience. How did you realize, or how early did that realization shape the type of marketing problems you chose to specialize in?
I believe most of the people who are listening to this podcast today won't remember, but before Facebook became a thing, there was a social platform called MySpace. And I will never forget that in a very short period of time, Facebook took over, and MySpace, that used to be a big thing, became basically a non-relevant platform, right? And then I quickly realized that owning a list, having access to your audience without asking for consent, without asking for someone's authorization to get in touch, like Facebook nowadays and back to those days, MySpace, I realized that's a very important component for successful marketing, right? And then basically over the years, since then, how many social platforms we have seen coming up and basically fading or completely disappearing, right? Multiple across the globe. And then basically that has been my foundation, my big belief since then, right? I believe people underestimate of the power of the channel. It is the only channel that allows you to get in touch with your customers the day you want, from the moment you want, to say what you want. Obviously, there are some components that you have to respect, like deliverability. You have to collect consent before you send emails, this kind of stuff. But still nowadays, it's the only channel that allows you to get access directly to them and build relationships with them.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of us can agree, if not all, that email marketing is one of the most tried and true methods of, reaching your customers or clients or, people that interact with your business directly, rather than relying on some third-party platform, like you said, which many come and go, right? Facebook's been around for a while now, but there is constant changes on these platforms that are often out of our control as marketers, that we can't really get a grasp on as they're ever evolving, as opposed to something like email, where it's completely direct and within the purview, of your campaign, and you can ultimately control the outcome much more easily. So I think, that approach and philosophy you adopted early on is likely paid off dividends in your career.
Yeah.
So you didn't just take on a bigger title at NVISION, you effectively built the lifecycle marketing function from a single specialist role into a full discipline that the agency now leads with. What was one operating model you had to design? Was it structured, tooling process, etc., to take lifecycle marketing from a service rather than, what it had been before?
Yeah, you mentioned something very important. I don't see email as a service, right? And I would say the same for the other channels. So they should be interconnected, right? Especially nowadays, with users are collecting information, validating whether a given brand makes sense for them or not, across multiple platforms in multiple moments, basically in ways that we don't expect, right? So my way to approach and how to interconnect all the channels basically was establishing a proper approach to customer journey mapping. So I would consider this is the foundation of not only what I just did over the past years here at NVISION, but fundamentally speaking, as a practice. I believe when it comes to the process of putting together a strategy that becomes cohesive, consistent, but fundamentally speaking, developing in a way that serves the audience, you need to understand who are your customers, which kind of needs they have, which I love to label them as pain points, right? And actually, it's a framework pretty simple. You just have to break down all your customers' activities across all the stages, traffic, engagement, conversion, etc., right? And then from there, you break down where these activities takes place. And then fundamentally speaking, what are the pain points? And then from there, you have basically a full picture about what you have to incorporate into our content calendar to make that message effective, right? So that has been my approach. And then what I have found by testing exhaustively this approach across multiple clients every single quarter, because we have campaigns organized by quarters. So you can see consistently the results being basically building over time. So basically people engage from the moment when you incorporate a message that addresses a specific pinpoint that you have been able to identify. It's really hard to go wrong. So basically you are serving more effectively your audience by doing so. So that has been the approach that I do believe that works.
Yeah, no, that's extremely insightful. I think that was very well put. And I personally myself have gained, quite a bit of key details just from hearing your response there. Another thing that I wanted to go into is you've now worked with, over 55 brands across different sectors like healthcare, e-commerce, beauty, fashion, entertainment, among other sectors. What strategic patterns have become clearer only after working across such different customer journeys and business models?
Yeah, I would say I do believe that there are three, in our particular case, and then arguably speaking, we could kind of do the same with other places. I do believe that there are three types of customers, right? Three natures of business, right? The ones that you can allow customers to buy something online, so I would categorize them as e-commerce clients. Every single transaction that takes place online. The second one, traditional B2B clients, very traditional B2B, right? That the sales cycle takes normally 6 to 9 months, sometimes even longer. And then we have in between B2C service-based clients, services that we use in our day-by-day basis. So basically a dental clinic, for example, a aesthetic clinic is some along those lines. So when I compare, and by developing customer journeys for this three type of customers that I just talked about over time, I was able to identify some patterns, right? And indeed, if you put on top of it another layer of the specific segment that the client belongs to, still you see some patterns in terms of pain points. So one of the things that captured my attention is that, yes, indeed, people are looking for comparisons, inevitably. So if you're comparing a dental clinic, and if you have kids, for example, you're looking for an orthodontic dental clinic, inevitably you're going to compare two clinics at least to make sure that you're taking your kids to the correct clinic, right? So why not talk about comparisons openly about that? Then price, another very important component. So some businesses, particularly B2B, they tend, for whatever reason, believe that by hiding the price information, I will create opportunity for my sales rep to have a conversation with that particular prospective client. But we are in 2026. And now if you go to ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, you can easily identify or have an idea about how much it costs a specific service or specific product, regardless of the industry. So why not make that particular information explicit? So then there we go. We have comparison, price. Then social proof obviously becomes a very important thing. So people need to know what other people are saying. So what I'm trying to say is that there are some specific patterns in terms of pain points that I was able to identify over time. How it works is another very important thing. So as a business owner, sometimes we are too close to our product, to our service, that we assume that people understand how our product works or how our service works, which is completely the opposite. Why not make that information in a way that becomes a digestible step 1, 2, 3, so that you are ensuring that you are conveying to the public how specifically your offer works, right? So then, answering your question, I do believe that there are some patterns that we have to pay attention when developing customer journeys, and the ones that I outline here are some of them.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes perfect sense. I think, there are key differences, obviously, among different sectors, but one principle that will remain true forever is messaging is key, and making sure that you have that clarity and that you're able to communicate effectively and not just think from the scope of the business, right? You're working internally every day, thinking of the product. It's something like the back of your hand, as opposed to someone who's never been exposed to your service or product. You have to bridge that gap, right? And having that clear messaging, is one of those, foundational aspects that these campaigns need to understand, right, is I think very clear. So another thing I wanted to tackle is, as you've moved from building campaigns yourself to directing broader digital and lifecycle programs, which systems have helped you transfer your decision making standards to the team without reducing the quality of work?
I would say I'm a big believer in frameworks. I'm a big believer. I believe, especially with everything that happens with each one of the channels that we are talking about in digital marketing, social media, email, SEO, paid ads, etc. So there are standards, right, that change over time. One of the mechanisms that I normally consider is the establishment of frameworks that encompasses what are the baselines of work. So how we're going to operate across these channels in a way that not only deliver results, but considers what's changing. Right now with AI, a lot is changing, or a lot is reshaping. Definitely, right? People are not necessarily going to Google to search, but people are now asking questions using AI. So how we set up our standards to basically to be updated with these current trends and the current change, right? So that I'm a big believer in frameworks, basically, and basically documentation that basically outlines all the practices that we have to ensure that we're going to pursue or execute in order to support. And then by having these frameworks in place, becomes a very simple and effective vehicle to communicate across different departments about what needs to be done, what needs to be observed, and then as well as opportunity for people to collaborate with their perspective, with their insights. So then by having a benchmark, there's opportunity to collectively as a team to discuss what we can possibly do to elevate that particular benchmark. But without the benchmark, it becomes really hard to discuss anything, right?
Right, exactly. I think that makes perfect sense. Having the framework in place is of the utmost importance ultimately when you're delegating different things to a team so that you can have a shared set of standards or that benchmark, like you mentioned. I think everything becomes much more unified with a proper framework and a focus on that foundation and that structure, ensuring the framework is good,
Mhm.
right? And having the team essentially work around that.
One example now, when it comes to email CRM, there's a lot of conversations around automations that we can use AI basically to kind of support more effectively, right? That particular workflow, etc. That's a very good example, right? So platforms tend to release a number of features in the hopes that the public is going to enjoy them, but not necessarily every single feature basically supports a specific, basically brings value to the bottom line, right? So a very simple example is to come up with something that perhaps a given platform is offering you as an option and come up with a holdout experiment. So basically you split the traffic with 50% of the subscribers or the contacts into this particular new workflow using AI or whatever that you'd like to test. And then you basically create another one that basically doesn't have any kind of initiative. And then and then you can come up, you can be a little bit more elaborative in your approach, but by running a proper holdout experiment, you would be able to effectively validate the lift that that particular initiative is providing. Right? Is one of the examples that I like to emphasize when it comes to what we just discussed regarding frameworks. Because it's not because someone told me that I should do something that I should do. You have to validate that. And as soon as you validate that, you have the data to support that particular initiative. So then that initiative becomes part of the framework. So that's an important consideration that I believe is important to mention.
Yeah, no, I think that that's entirely clear and it is important. It makes a lot of sense to have that emphasis, right, that you're talking about. Another on the topic of frameworks, you yourself have a four-stage system which moves people from attraction and subscription into nurturing, conversion, and retention. When you're auditing a business, how do you determine which transition in that system is restricting growth before building additional campaigns?
Well, we have to consider first which kind of client we're talking about when it comes to growth, right? So for e-commerce clients, it's pretty simple to do that because you can measure dollar by dollar. For a B2C service-based client that we just discussed, as an example, a aesthetic clinic, the conversion normally takes place on the client side. So we generate the lead for the client, so the client needs to close that lead. With that said, I would say in order to determine how we can approach properly, I would say that first of all, we have to have access to 4 data points. The number one, which typically is on our shoulders, marketing responsibility, which is responsible for the traffic. How much traffic we are driving to that particular website or for that particular ecosystem, right? The number 2 is how many engagements we are getting. So in this particular example for the aesthetic clinic, how many form inquiries or how many calls we are generating. From there, we need to identify how many conversions those inquiries have generated. And then finally, it's important to know the average deal value, or when it comes to e-commerce, the average order value. With these 4 pieces of information, you can determine which kind of problem we're talking about. Are we dealing with a traffic problem? Because the conversion is good, but the traffic is low, and because of that, the number of inquiries is low. Are we dealing with engagement problem? People land on the page, but people don't know what to do. So basically, traffic is solid, but the engagement is not there. Or we're dealing with a conversion problem. So the conversion is not happening. So people on the client side perhaps is not supported with content that could overcome objections, that could prevent some conversions. Or when it comes to e-commerce, perhaps the checkout process is too much complicated that's preventing people to finalize their transactions, right? So that would be the foundation that will allow you to understand which kind of problem we're talking about, and then from there incorporate the proper initiative to support growth. Then after this first round, I would say that the next one would be the most important one by far, which is the retention, right? Over the years, I have noticed that how many companies undervalue the power of email. Again, not as a channel, but as an opportunity to support retention, as an opportunity to support repeat purchases. By definition, if you have a business that only relies on new leads every single month, by definition, you have a non-sustainable financial business because you you fully depend and rely on leads every single month. But from the moment when you have a retention system in place, so then you can analyze what is the retention rate that you have been able to generate every single month. And that has obviously a lot of implication when it comes to cash flow, because the stronger your retention is, normally speaking, stronger your cash flow is. So basically, these are the components that normally I try to address and identify in order to provide proper support for a given client.
Hey, we hope you're enjoying the coffee and the conversation so far. This show is powered by Digital Web Solutions. And if you've ever wondered how the biggest brands actually build authority, this is it. DWS has a massive network of over 250,000 publishers, real sites that help you rank on Google, and more importantly, stay visible in AI search. It's the heavy lifting most teams just can't do on their own. As a thank you for listening, they're offering an exclusive free strategy call just for our eCoffee listeners. It's a great way to map out your authority plan for 2026. Just click the link below to book yours and see how they can help scale your brand. All right, now let's get back to the show.
Yeah, that is very clear. I do believe that looking at things from that way is essentially necessary, right? When identifying these bottlenecks that you're seeing within a business. And on the topic of bottlenecks, you've written about businesses reaching the point where referrals, fragmented freelancers, or isolated marketing tactics can no longer support consistent growth for them. What signals help you realize that a business is commercially ready for an integrated agency relationship?
I would say is the openness to receive support from external partner, but these external partners should be grounded in data. I believe there's a lot of buzz out there. There's a lot of ideas that are not grounded in something that effectively has the proof that works, right? If the client has the openness to work with a company or with an agency that will complement their gaps in terms of knowledge and skills, I do believe that this is going to be a tremendous successful relationship. But Again, there are some clients that don't have this appetite. Others, they do believe that internally they can do better. So that's why I say, I believe the signal for me is when you see the client open for a new insight, a new direction, right? Provided by someone who knows what he's doing. And then normally that marriage is very well, it's a successful marriage, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that 100% is something I have experience with, and understanding, some agencies are, forcing a relationship on a client or not forcing a relationship per se, but trying to manage a relationship with a client who's not open to that idea of, people working within their team so closely, and, managing these different systems of theirs, or trying to implement these new strategies, right? So that openness you talked about, I think, is very key in that process. On the slightly more technical side, you recommend using GA4 path exploration to understand the actual conversion window, and then building an email cadence around that behavior. Which signals tell you that a sequence should be accelerated or extended?
You have to pay attention to when people are more inclined, or when people are not necessarily inclined, but when people are tend to buy again, or to basically place another order, right? So obviously, when it comes to the different types of clients that we are talking about here today, you have to pay attention to the industry. When it comes to e-commerce, normally the window of time is shorter compared to B2B, for example, right? So I believe that kind of analysis makes more sense, obviously, when it comes to e-commerce based clients. And normally the window is over the following days of the first purchase, in a very short period of time, maximum 7 days. I have seen some situations that, yes, you see a little bit some transactions days after, but the first 7 days following the first purchase are golden days, very important days that we have to maximize and use this kind of approach to identify what is the sweet spot, how many mails we should have, how many touch points we should consider, not only necessarily mail, SMS plays an important role as well. And sometimes you have to think a little bit out of the box, not necessarily only mail or SMS we should consider. Maybe why not call their customer? Why not get in touch with them in different ways? So I believe now we are living days that we need to be creative and recognize that in the end of the day, we're dealing with people, and people are looking for a problem, hoping that your product or service is going to solve their needs. So again, what I'm trying to say is that this kind of analysis is important to identify how fast or how frequently in that particular window of time you should get in touch. And then from there, you can identify the best approach to support your customer, take the next step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I think on the topic of these different channels that, are so important to these campaigns and to the customer journey, a channel that's been actually not so much as a means of communication, but as a means of reaching your ideal customer, as a means of getting out there, right, is within Google search, which has been moving directly from just providing lists of answers to giving AI overviews in a contextual conversation.
Yeah.
As discovery becomes an extended dialogue rather than a sequence of isolated searches, how should marketers rethink the journey between initial awareness and first-party nurturing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say this is one of the big shifts when it comes to search, for sure. I understand, and I face the situation the following way. Right? I do believe that, yes, people are not necessarily putting aside Google, but they are considering more frequently AI search platforms, LLMs, to find the answers they're looking for, including myself. I find myself more frequently now looking and searching using AI rather than Googling like before, like 3 or 4 years ago, right? I believe it comes down, in order to strive in this particular new environment, content remains the king, as you know. But the question is, do you have the chances to become the source for all the questions that your customer has across all the customer journey states? If you're confident with that, good luck. If you don't have confidence on that, that goes back to the point that we discussed before, the importance of customer journey, because by having a customer journey, you will be able to map all the possible questions that potentially your customers have. And then from the moment when you map them out and you have all the questions that people are frequently asked, so then you have the opportunity to provide effectively across your ecosystem, on your website, social profiles, emails, etc., not necessarily so much email, but every single thing that is searchable by AI platform nowadays, that particular answer. So that's a very important component. I'm a big believer that nowadays, every single brand to succeed should proceed with an in-depth content audit to not only ensure that we have answers for all the questions that your customers have, but more importantly, refine them in a way that becomes rich piece of content that contains information that people are looking for and not fluff stuff just for the sake of doing, right? So it is in the end of the day, my understanding, it is a game to become the source. But the point is that, and the question is, how many answers you have? Do you have the answers for all the customers across all the customer journey states? So that's the way how I do believe nowadays we should approach.
Yeah, 100%. I do think it's a very interesting shift to look at from a marketing perspective, because the intent, the action is more or less the same, where users are searching for answers, right? It's just the means of getting that information and the way that information is presented to them is taking a slightly different form, right? The output is a little different. Right. So now we have AI search, which can answer increasingly detailed questions before a user reaches a brand's website. How do you think businesses should create a stronger bridge from answer-led discovery through, email, CRM, communities, or tools, other first-party experiences?
I believe the bridge, to be honest, it starts, in my opinion, in the ability of using, when it comes to email, CRM, in the ability to use make the most of the characteristics of this channel to collect the information that only you can collect using mail, right? From the moment, especially when you have a first transaction or first customer, you have, as we discussed before, the ability to get in touch directly with this person via email, right? So why not build this bridge by asking the things that you don't know about that particular person, right? And then at scale over time, you're going to have a lot of very important insights to incorporate into our strategy, not only to better communicate you to the public, but to better service that particular subscriber. I'm a big believer in in-depth personalization. And when I say personalization, not segmenting just lists, but providing an optimal user experience for that particular subscriber, right? And how you do that? Well, by knowing very well that particular person, but effectively building a relationship with this person, right? And again, that's the power of email. You have the ability to get in touch with that particular subscriber directly via email. But now, again, in order to build this bridge when it comes to AI, I'm a big believer that we do have opportunity to enrich our database with the information that matters, and then feed the system with this information that we would be able to collect via email.
Yeah, absolutely. The relationship between, the AI implementation that we've been seeing so much across the board lately, I think does have this interesting impact on the subject of, CRM data and things like that. You've actually been vocal about followers on social media platforms being sort of rented in a sense, whereas email and CRM provide a much more durable relationship. Does the expansion of AI generated search make owning identifiable audiences relationships even more strategically important? And where do you think businesses should begin?
I would say yes. It comes down to the ability, in my opinion, to build effective retention systems. As we briefly discussed before, without that becomes really hard to survive, in my opinion, because you become paid as a slave. Who wants to spend continuously over time tons of money with ads, right? So you do that because you need, right? So in order to get traffic and in the hopes that we're going to generate conversions. So when you have a proper retention system, so that increasing the chances that for every single customer that you generate or you create, opportunity for that particular person to become a loyal customer, to buy more from you frequently over time. So that reduces the need for paid ads or reliance on paid ads over time. But more importantly, a foundation to support everything else that we're talking about AI related. So the more customers you have, likely more people are going to say good things about you if you're doing a good job. So if more people are saying good things about you, more social proof you create. So more signals you are providing to LLMs for consideration in AI citations and so on. So it's a spiral that basically increases over time, right? So basically, I believe, again, business underestimates the power of retention systems. They underestimate the implications on the financial side that generates. And then I would say that's an untapped opportunity now moving forward, especially in AI days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the shift that these businesses have to begin considering now, right, with all these different changes at this forefront that we're experiencing, I think is very well encapsulated by what you just said. And on the subject of email marketing, right, and CRMs and how AI and these tools have sort of begun changing those, we now see HubSpot, Mailchimp, and Salesforce increasingly moving in the direction of AI assisted content creation that actually helps agents, their AI agents, analyze customer data, build audiences, launching workflows, and taking action. What strategic foundation do you think must be established before an agency or a business gives these AI agents that degree of control?
Test whether they work or not. And by running a holdout experiment, you can have an idea whether they work or not, right? And then from there, only from there, consider that. I'm not necessarily against the idea of platforms providing new features and this kind of thing, right? But I'm a big believer that for reasons which I understand, sometimes the platform wants to create a kind of positioning, trying to communicate to the public that we have tons of features. But sometimes the question is how relevant that particular feature is, right? A good example, in my opinion, is open rates when it comes to email. So in 2015, we had that iOS Apple update becoming open rates no longer relevant, at least in the beginning for Apple devices. Open rates, even before, never has been a reliable metric, right? But still nowadays in 2020, years after that particular Apple release, I see reports across multiple email platforms, CRM platforms, giving a lot of emphasis to open rates. So that's the kind of thing. So in order to consider or not something, do your due diligence. If possible, try to run a holdout experiment to validate the effective lift that particular is generating compared to a control group versus a test group. So then you will be able to properly assess whether you should consider or not that particular.
Yeah, I hope a lot of people find value in that, because to me, that's a very practical approach to a problem many businesses are facing right now, or a challenge that's in front of them, right? It's this thing that they need to build somewhat of a philosophy around and how they approach it. And I think your answer there was very clear and insightful. The last question I want to ask before we let you go today is, for a marketing team that has basic email marketing, basic automation in place, but wants to prepare for this, AI mediated customer journey, what are the 3 most commercially valuable improvements that they should make over the next 12 months?
I would start with the basics. Step number 1 would be go out and speak with your customers. People are forgetting to do that. Speak more with your customers. Try to understand them. It's not because it's your customer today that is going to be your customer tomorrow. You need to really understand the people that is believing in you. You understand their pain points. And not only by email, but calling customers, interacting with them. That would be my first recommendations. Number 2 would be, especially for a small business, create your customer journey. Document the findings that you have been able to collect from your customers. Documenting, it's a very healthy exercise, because from the moment when you put on the paper all the findings, you will be able to realize and effectively what are the pain points that you have to come up with content to address those pain points. So it becomes a super healthy exercise, with the caveat that you don't have to do that just for one time. You have to do that over time. A customer journey is a living document, right? So change needs over time, and your customer changes as well. You have different products, different services that you might consider over time, different geographic areas that you might explore. So you need to obviously consider your customer journey as a living document. And then finally, come up with a retention system, as we briefly also discussed before, that's going to support you in the future, right? As a simple example, especially now with AI, so when it comes to lead generation, etc., yes, you can have all the answers for all your customers' questions, but from the moment when you have a situation when you compare 2 companies, for example, one that generates 1 lead per month, for example, and that customer pays $100 per month, By the end of the year, you're going to have 1,200, right, in terms of revenue. If you compare with company B that generates 1 lead per month, but after the first month, the customer pays you monthly $100, you are going to have by the end of the year, roughly speaking, to be precise, $7,800. So it's a 550% difference comparing company A to company B. You might argue, okay, my customer might not be inclined to pay $100 every single month. Okay, that's fine. You're going to potentially reduce to $50 to whatever number you want. But my point is that regardless of the amount that our clients are going to pay you over time as returning customers, unquestionably, the company B always going to be more profitable than the company A. And that's the part that I see a lot of business not thinking about, right? So what I'm trying to say is that if you are close to your customers and if you document their pain points and address them consistently over time, and by doing so, likely you're going to generate more leads and create more conversions. If you have a retention system in place, it's really hard to someone to stop you. You're going to have an instrument that's going to support you to strive as an organization over time, right? So marketing has a lot with financials. One supports the other. And I do believe that would be the 3 steps that, especially for a small business, you should take in consideration nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that our listeners can find value in that. That really, I think, very clearly puts into perspective the kinds of things that small businesses should be emphasizing and what they should be looking at when starting these campaigns or when reviewing their current approach to their customer journey. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on today. Your answers have been completely insightful from my perspective, hopefully for our audience as well.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, Marino, it's been awesome. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks so much.